When passengers scream on a flight, it usually means something's gone terribly wrong. But here's the twist. Most times, the pilots aren't moved by the panic. Instead, they stay quiet, take control, and guide the plane to a safe landing. But when have these moments happened? And how did the pilots manage to stay so composed? Stay tuned as we reveal some of the most intense in-air emergencies. On March 5, 2024, an Air Asia flight bound for Bangkok became the center of a mid-air panic after a rapid loss of cabin pressure triggered a terrifying chain of events. Flight FD 3017 had just departed from Chiang Mai with 156 passengers on board, many of them tourists returning from the northern city. However, within minutes of departure, everything changed. At 18,000 feet, loud hissing noises erupted from the overhead vents. Then, the oxygen masks dropped. Passengers began screaming. Some wept openly. Others clutched loved ones or recorded shaky videos on their phones. It was reported that a woman fainted as her children panicked beside her. The pressure drop was so sudden that overhead panels buckled slightly. Cabin crew rushed to reassure passengers while securing themselves in jump seats, unable to communicate clearly due to the sound of rushing air. According to later reports from passengers and crew, there was no immediate announcement from the flight deck. Some interpreted the silence as a sign the pilots were overwhelmed or even incapacitated. But what was happening in the cockpit told a very different story. As pressure sensors triggered the emergency descent protocol, the pilots quietly coordinated with each other and quickly reduced altitude to safer levels. The aircraft dropped from 18,000 to 10,000 feet in less than 5 minutes. Still, the absence of any communication left passengers convinced something had gone terribly wrong. But in reality, the pilots were fully in control. Air Asia later confirmed a malfunction in the pressurization system caused the emergency. He had been communicating with the air traffic controllers, coordinating a return to Chiang Mai and preparing to reroute to Bangkok once the aircraft was stabilized. But beyond this, there's another shocking story. It might interest you to know the details. It was 3:24 p.m. on January 15, 2009, when Flight 1549 left the runway at New York's LaGuardia Airport. It was a routine departure, bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. The Airbus A320 carried 150 passengers and 5 crew, including Captain Chesley "Sully" Sullenberg and First Officer Jeff Skiles. Both were highly experienced. Skiles had just completed training on the Airbus, while Sully had logged thousands of hours, including time in the Air Force. They had barely climbed above 2,800 feet when the unthinkable happened. At 3:27 p.m., just 90 seconds after takeoff, a flock of Canadian geese struck the aircraft. The birds were large, some over 10 pounds. Several were sucked into the engines. Passengers heard loud bangs. Flames erupted from both engines. Then, silence. No thrust, no power. The aircraft was now a 70-ton glider. Inside the cabin, passengers screamed. "We're gonna be in the Hudson," Sully told ATC. That was it. A line that would later be replayed around the world. At 3:30 p.m., the captain activated the backup power unit and took manual control. The Airbus systems helped glide the craft, but it was the pilot's training that would bring it down safely. Sully chose a narrow stretch of the Hudson River, wedged between skyscrapers, bridges, and ferry routes. He angled the aircraft just right, nose slightly up, wing level. In the back, a flight attendant shouted, "Brace! Brace! Heads down! Stay down!" This returned the screaming by the passengers. At 3:31 p.m., just 4 minutes after takeoff, Flight 1549 touched the water. The damage hard, but not too bad. The tail dipped, the nose rocked forward, and then it slid. The Airbus skipped across the Hudson like a stone before slowing to a stop near 48th Street in Manhattan. Flight attendants opened the doors, deployed the slides, and got passengers out. Later, investigation confirmed it. Sully had made the right call. A simulator test showed that if he had tried turning back to LaGuardia, the plane would have crashed into buildings. His decision to land in the Hudson saved lives. And while media hailed him as a hero, Sully insisted it wasn't just him alone, but a teamwork effort. Still, not all pilots get a smooth landing. Sometimes the real problem starts inside the cockpit. In the next story, what scared the passengers was something very different. It all happened over Oxfordshire, England. On June 10, 1990, at exactly 8:20 a.m., British Airways Flight 5390 had just reached cruising altitude, about 17,000 feet, when a loud explosion came, scaring everyone on board. The forward windscreen of the BAC-111 had blown out mid-air. A powerful rush of air flooded the cockpit. In a split second, Captain Tim Lancaster was yanked from his seat and sucked halfway out of the plane. Only his legs remained inside, pinned by the cockpit controls. Inside the cabin, passengers screamed. Flight attendant Nigel Ogden rushed forward and managed to grab the captain's belt. Another crew member held onto Ogden to keep both men from being pulled out. At the time, Atchison had just 7,500 hours of flying experience. Now, he was alone at the controls with a half-ejected body in his peripheral vision. The autopilot had disconnected, the cockpit door had blown off, and the oxygen masks hadn't deployed. But Atchison showed no sign of panic. He immediately began an emergency descent, communicating with air traffic control. Meanwhile, the passenger cabin was filled with screams as the plane descended rapidly to a safe altitude. The crew told passengers there was a minor technical fault, although many already knew something was very wrong. But Atchison continued flying with focus. When the plane reached 11,000 feet, where oxygen was stable, he began guiding the aircraft towards Southampton, and eventually he maneuvered the plane down into the airport for a bumpy but safe landing. Luckily, Captain Lancaster survived. He had been exposed to 17,000 feet of altitude for more than 20 minutes, unconscious but held in place by sheer luck and crew effort. He suffered frostbite, bruises, and a few broken bones, but lived. The passengers later credited the pilot's calm response and the crew's quick actions for preventing disaster. But beyond this, there's another shocking story. It might interest you to know how a plane crash-landed with no landing gear and everyone walked away alive. Let's find out. On the morning of November 4th, 2010, Qantas Flight 32 lifted off from Singapore's Changi Airport en route to Sydney. The Airbus A380, then the largest passenger plane in the world, had 469 people aboard, including 29 crew. In charge was Captain Richard de Crespigny, an experienced pilot with many years of flying. With him were two other captains, a first officer and a second officer. Qantas had put a full training crew on this flight. 6 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft was climbing past 7,000 feet over Batam Island, Indonesia. Passengers were enjoying breakfast when a sudden boom ripped through the cabin. Some heard a thud. According to reports, many felt the floor jolt, while others thought a wheel had burst, but it was something far worse. The number 2 engine, one of the left inboard engines, had exploded violently. Shrapnel tore through the aircraft's wing, fuselage, and internal wiring. The damage was massive. Engine parts had punctured the fuel tank, disabled multiple hydraulic systems, cut off fuel lines, and destroyed wiring linked to flight controls. The flight control computers went haywire with over 400 separate system alerts, more than any Airbus crew had ever seen in one flight. Passengers looked around. There was no announcement, no oxygen mask dropped, but de Crespigny and his team remained still, reading every alert, working the problem line by line. However, there was something that made the crisis different. Unlike most in-flight emergencies, where pilots focus on one or two major failures, Qantas 32 had dozens. The flight computer was overwhelmed. Even the electronic checklists were incomplete. Systems that weren't supposed to fail together were now failing in clusters. Yet there was no panic in the cabin. The flight attendants, having received minimal updates from the flight deck, simply kept calm and asked passengers to remain seated. For almost 90 minutes, Qantas 32 remained in the air. The aircraft circled Singapore, burning off fuel before an attempted landing. During this time, the pilots calculated that the plane might not stop in time, or worse, might be uncontrollable on the runway. Still, there were no rush decisions. When the plane finally lined up for its landing back at Changi, it was flying on 2 good engines out of 4. The flaps, brakes, and reverse thrust were partially damaged. The captain warned the cabin to brace, and then the plane touched down. It came in fast. The brakes held. One of the wheels exploded on contact, but the aircraft stopped. Everyone on board was safe. When fire crews surrounded the aircraft, they found fuel still leaking, hot brakes, and visible holes in the wing. Investigation later revealed that it was one of the most complex and dangerous mechanical failures ever survived by a commercial aircraft. The passengers didn't realize how close they were to danger, but the coordination in the cockpit turned a damaged plane into a safe landing. In the end, it wasn't luck, rather the training and the calculated decision that brought everyone home safely. Have you ever had a frightening experience on a flight? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. And click the next video on your screen. You'll enjoy it.